Welcome, everyone, to this month's episode of Recovery Rockstar. My name is Melinda White. I am a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is that I have not had to use a mood or a mind-altering substance since December 28, 2011. It's also a wonderful reminder that I'm blessed with the people who went before me and taught me the way into a life of recovery and also to be of service to others. So I remain so grateful for my recovery. And I want to highlight a couple of things. I often like to remind people that Narcan overdose kits are available at any of the pilot sites in the state of Vermont. So I encourage you to go on the Vermont Health Department's website to find a pilot site near you. Also, the harm reduction packs, and those do include Narcan as well as other helpful literature and tools that can provide some harm reduction practices in your community. Those also are becoming more readily available. And I also want to remind people that in the state of Vermont, we have 12 recovery centers. So I encourage people to visit your local recovery center and see what other resources are available to you, both for people who are seeking recovery and families. So I just want to also remind people that in Vermont, we have Recovery Day at the State House coming up on February 16th. That will be virtual, so we will more than likely have a very large attendance. There is a slate of speakers and presenters, and I know it's going to be beautiful and powerful as it always is annually. So I encourage people to look up the Recovery Vermont website and find the registration information and join us for Recovery Day. So today I am overjoyed to be able to interview an amazing woman that I heard a couple of years ago when I was attending the New England Institute of Addiction Studies. And I heard her story, a mom of somebody who is in recovery. And I will admit that I was in tears through a lot of it. And I was extremely grateful to hear somebody who is so open about that journey and willing to share so other families can know that they're not alone. So this morning, I am going to introduce to you Maureen Cavanagh. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it.
I am overjoyed that we got connected. I know we've had a chance to talk on the phone, and I just feel like that it's hard to say, like, you feel like you've known somebody for years and years, even though it's the first time you're actually talking to them.
Yeah, I know. It's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I find that, when it comes to this topic of addiction recovery, the bonds that we share are pretty intimate because it's about not wanting to die of the disease, wanting to help others not die of the disease. And that's a pretty intimate thing to share with people, even that you've never met before. So the first thing I'll ask you, Maureen, is, I know you wrote a book, and if you're comfortable just giving a little overview about that book so people can get a feel for who you are and what you do.
Sure. The book is a memoir, and it's called If You Love Me, A Mother's Journey Through Her Daughter's Opioid Addiction. And the name of the book, kind of sums up why I wrote the book, because I feel like this is a common thing that people aren't aware of. And I wanted to get my story out there, and I wanted people to know what families go through. But I also named the book, If You Love Me. We say this as parents, right? If you love me, you'd be good. If you love me, you'd clean your room. And as kids too, if you love me, you'd let me stay out late. It's this thing that happens sometimes in families, kind of, of course you love them regardless. And, but we say it to each other. And Katie had a long, brutal struggle, my daughter, with addiction. And there was a period of time where she was doing pretty well. And every time she went in, and she went in over 40 times into some form of treatment, I was all about it. This is it. I'm behind you. This is going to work. And I thought I understood, and it was getting towards the end of her going into treatment that I felt like, oh God, we've been doing this for years. I was getting tired, and God knows she was getting tired. And she had, about 3 or 4 months, had gone through treatment with some people and into a sober living with them. Great group of people. They were all holding each other up. And she had a recurrence and slipped away one night. No one could find her. And she came home. They went out and they looked for her, and they looked everywhere. And finally, about 3 o'clock in the morning, they found her. And when they found her, they brought her home to my house. She came in and she was sitting on my kitchen floor, and crying and dirty and just so sad and disappointed with how things had turned out. And she knew she couldn't go back where she was. And I said, Katie, honey, I love you so much and you're going to die. And she looked up at me and said, if you love me, you'd let me die. And that's when I got it. I thought it was me and her in this, but I realized we were having two very separate experiences and we were going to have two very separate recoveries. And I wanted to tell that story because this is truly my story. It's not hers. It's heavily influenced by hers because of how much I love her. But I did kind of all the crazy, all the things that I would recommend that you don't do. And at the end, I started to realize the things that I did need to do. And I hope people take that away, that they're not alone.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I remember hearing you share some of this at the New England Institute of Addiction Studies. And I feel like that's been a piece that's been missing in our area. I say of Vermont, but just in Vermont as a whole, is hearing the authentic stories of the family members to learn that journey. I'm contacted often by family members with adult children or spouses and partners that they don't know what to do to support their loved one. Right. And it can be challenging to find a way that is well received to tell them that you have to focus on yourself, even though the issue is with your loved one that has addiction.
I mean, when people would tell me that, I would say, you know what, I'll focus on myself when she's well. And I mean, that makes perfect sense as a parent. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I mean, if somebody would have said, you know what, if you cut off your arm, she'll be fine, I would have gotten a butter knife and went to work. But it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that. It works the opposite. We have to take care of ourselves so that we become the rock. We become the safe place that they can come for information and for love and support.
Right. So tell me a little bit about what your world looked like when you learned that she had an addiction and how that affected you.
So she came to me, which was, and told me after having a really rough first year at college that she had been experimenting with drugs and she had tried heroin and she was scared. So I thought that she would always come to me. I was horrified because this is not anything I would have even imagined in my wildest dreams from her. But so when she came to me, I was like, well, this is our relationship. She came to me. She'll always come to me if she struggles. She went into an outpatient program and she seemed to be doing well and went back to school, but locally this time, living at home. And I thought that we have it, we got it. We did this. And because for a long time, because she was a child, but now she's a grown woman and making her own decisions and having her own, unique problems and dealing with them in her own way. And she didn't have it. And I underestimated the power of addiction.
Right. So once you realized that there was a struggle, and you had mentioned earlier about how you had kind of done all the wrong things. What does that look like when you say that through the journey you learned that some of the things that you consider now those were the wrong ways to approach it? What does some of that look like to share with some of the family members who might be watching?
So thank goodness that both she and I have a very kind of a dark sense of humor. So the book is there's very funny parts of the book. I mean, but when you really think about it, it's not funny, but I look back on it now and the two of us laugh about this because it was totally, I was totally out of control, completely and totally out of control, hunting her down in the worst possible places that she didn't belong, but I certainly at my age didn't belong, kidnapping her off the street, following her, just doing all of the things that none of which worked, thinking that if I could just tell her something enough times, that would be the thing. And that doesn't work either. And basically I became kind of a lunatic and she couldn't come to me anymore with things. And I was trying to arrange everything so that she never got to the point where she felt, even if she had successfully completed a program, well, it was all my idea and I had arranged it. So she didn't take ownership of it. So, and that's not that I'm not one of those tough love people, cut them off or send them out there, tell them, they have to do it on their own. No, because sometimes people are not in the position to gather the good resources, but we should never do anything. We should never do the things that somebody can do for themselves. And because we take their power away. And I was doing that unwittingly.
Right. And I love that you highlight that. Another thing that I can't recall if I had heard you share it at that event or if it was through one of our phone calls, but the studies on the brain and the way that somebody who struggles with addiction, the parts of the brain that are triggered, whether it's positive or negatively, and the amygdala is a part of the brain that we tend to live in, but also for family members, that it's a very similar part of the brain that's stimulated, because if you hear that your daughter's doing well, that excitement of the brain happens, similar to if she is struggling with withdrawal and finds a substance. So tell me a little bit about that, because I feel like we chatted a little and you've got some great knowledge on that.
It's that intermittent reinforcement, which is why we do anything that is negative, right? We get a reward from it. So it's not what are you doing, but why are you doing it? You're doing it because every once in a while it works, or it works temporarily anyhow. And parents go through that same thing. So the research is out of the University of Texas Tech by 3 researchers. Probably, there's probably more people attached to the research, but it's Spencer Bradshaw and Bradshaw, Shumway, and Kimball. And they've done research, functional MRI testing on the brains of family members, and have found that the more enmeshed you are, the longer you've been doing this, the more your happiness seems to be tied to their happiness, the more of a response you're going to get in the same areas of the brain that control a craving. So now a family member knows how a craving feels like, because let me tell you, when I thought that I could help her, there was nothing that was going to stop me. And that's what a craving feels like. Even though it didn't make any sense, even though it probably wouldn't work, even though it didn't work before, I still continued to do the same things. I didn't want to do it. I felt like I had to. So now families have this like, wow, that's what a craving feels like. That's why your loved one keeps going back, because that's what a craving feels like. And you're not working out of the logical and the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that is responsible for logic and reasoning. So it doesn't have to make sense. Right. And, once we know that, then we can practice as family members some of the same things we teach people that have a substance use disorder to practice to control their cravings.
I love that too, because it highlights how having that knowledge, sometimes having the simplest knowledge can make so many question marks become clear. I know for myself with my mom, she had also said back during my addiction, if I would give my life for you, if I could tell me what to do. And it's like, Mom, this is bigger than both of us. You need to let me go. That's what you need to do. And then I remember also being newer in recovery and having these moments of almost feeling like I was back in the day, we called it dope sick, but withdrawing, where it was like 3 months in and I'm feeling like I am detoxing off heroin again. What's going on? And I learned it wasn't in the first or second or third treatment, but it was much later about the post-acute withdrawal symptoms. So having somebody to say that's normal, total change.
Melinda, I'm so glad you brought that up. So what I've been doing is I created this curriculum for a facilitated family meeting that's curriculum driven. And as a parent, I didn't have the patience or the wherewithal to listen to somebody talk to me for an hour. I didn't. Right. And I also was constantly searching for information, but I didn't know which information was a treatment center, which information was bad information. I didn't know. So these meetings have the first 10 or 15 minutes have an educational module. And that's one of the modules is post-acute withdrawal syndrome, because I didn't find out what post-acute withdrawal syndrome is for years after I needed to know. And then I didn't know what I was looking at when I was looking at it being a very normal thing that people go through in the first 2 years that they go through this. So that, and then it ends with the last 10 minutes is a self-care module. And so you're introduced to self-care practices that create new neural pathways that get you from absolutely unhinged to calm quicker. So you develop this like exercise, this muscle, so that you can do that. that's what families need, and that's what they're not getting, because we need kind of an IOP for family members. And
Yes.
then that middle part of the meeting is all connection. And that's education, connection, and self-care are the three things that are missing. And I don't understand why we're not getting that, because she walked into over 40 different places, 40 entries into some form of treatment. I got 3 or 4 family meetings, and they were all around discharge planning, except for one, which was an hour long, like kind of everything you ever wanted to know about addiction that wasn't enough, that just scared the bejesus out of me.
Right, right. Yeah, I love hearing the way that you set up the curriculum that you have, because that's such a huge piece, is getting that combination of education to, scientific data to, the relationship. And we hear a lot too, the opposite. It used to be the opposite of addiction was recovery, and now it's connection. And what an important piece that is. I can say for myself, I remember my early recovery, I say this time around because there was multiple attempts, but I had somebody who was called a sponsor to me, and calling her with complete panic because I had a drug dream or because X, Y, and Z. And she'd let me she usually give me that 2 to 5 minutes to freak out. And then she'd say, okay, well, let's start here. Do you have a drink or a drug in your system? Nope. She goes, okay, glad to know you're so, so for her, it was like, this is totally normal. No, she didn't freak out over it. And that's so key for us, is to talk to somebody else who has been there, so they can tell us this is alarming compared to this is totally normal. You're where you're supposed to be.
And because I know that when my daughter would say I had a drug dream, I would say the same thing. But where are you right now? I'm safe. Okay. I think that's normal. I think it's normal to have those kind of dreams. So why don't you pick up the phone and call somebody in recovery, knowing where I end and she began, but also being able to say some of the right things,
Right. And I want to ask you on that note, as you move a little bit forward in the journey and got to a place where you learned, here are some things that are the right things to do. How did you get that knowledge? How did you start finding the quote unquote right things to do, as opposed to feeling like you're doing all the wrong things? What did that shift look like?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about being healthy, right? How to do that, the things that are going to be good for me and then ultimately good for her. And it was like a scavenger hunt. It was awful. I went to addiction medicine doctor, didn't want to see me. I went to a therapist that dealt with alcohol. It was like an alcohol and drug counselor, didn't want to see me. I wanted accurate information I could count on. So I started doing research, and I created these Magnolia New Beginnings, which is a nonprofit, and our support groups, so that when somebody came in there, that they got information that was corrected. If somebody passed on bad, information that wasn't correct, it was corrected in the group. But I was just, because I was a teacher before, so my answer to everything is always to learn more about it. And I just kept learning and learning and learning and taking trainings, but taking them from Harvard and taking them from Bessel van der Kolk and taking them from the people that wrote the books instead of secondhand, so that I could make myself the person that I needed when I was going through this. And in doing that, in trying to find information for myself and then building on that, I feel like I can at least discern what's true and what's not, because people are also almost always getting the loudest voice in the room, whether it's a family member or at a meeting, who seems to know everything and is often very, very misinformed.
Right, right. And so as you started finding some of the better fits for the right path for yourself, and in turn that helped you support your daughter more, what did it look like when you both found a place that was working for both of you? What did your program look like? And that could possibly mean that maybe she was still struggling with use, but you got to a place of more inner peace. Like what did that kind of shift look like when that shift happened?
You can see the progression in the book. And the book, I finished the book. The book went out to the publisher 3 or 4 days after she left what would be her last treatment center. But I didn't know that at the time. But you can see that I'm starting to realize that I need to start taking care of myself, both for me and for her. And then I need to let her make her own decisions because she was making them anyhow. But, I needed to step aside a little bit, but not without letting her know every day that she was loved and that I was there to support the good decisions and that I'm still here. I'm just realizing that you've made a lot of good decisions in the past too. And I believe in you. And I think that you can find the strength to do this. And that became the thing that I would say. And I started to learn about motivational interviewing, and I started to ask questions instead of telling her what to do and sitting her down and making a plan, because that was my plan. That wasn't her plan. And then just asking questions and trying to be curious about what she was thinking and biting my tongue sometimes when I thought I knew better, because I may have known better, but I may not have too. And I started to accept that possibility. That was eye-opening when she told me that day when she had that recurrence, and she told me how she really felt. So I started to step back from it. Mm-hmm. And when she made a mistake or when she did something that was unhealthy, I would say, okay, well, what are you going to do going forward? And I mean, her biggest thing, I think, is that she thought she was never going to be able to get her life back. What's right. The point of getting sober with all of this that she had been through? She overdosed 13 times to the point of death, probably another 20 when someone had Narcan and she didn't go to the hospital. I mean, she had a really incredibly difficult path, and was convinced that she could not do this. And it was kind of reinforced by the fact that, that relapse is a part of recovery thing, when relapse is really part of the disorder and not necessarily a part of recovery. So she started to think differently, I think, at some point, but she was convinced that she couldn't do it and that she would never get her life back.
It's amazing to hear you talk about that too, with your way of supporting her was to first make sure that she heard that she was loved. And that's such a big piece. And then also taking that motivational interviewing approach to asking the questions as opposed to saying, this is what you need to do. Even if the answer is obvious, there's a little video on YouTube. I think it's a, 2-ish minute video called It's Not About the Nail. And it's such a great video. So I figured
I use it actually in the training. So, yeah.
Oh, I love it. I try to, when I do trainings, I also like to incorporate it because it's just such a great demonstration of, even if we know this would be better for you. You earlier said, even in this interview, that we're taking away our loved one's power, right? So when I'm trying to support patients that come to our clinic, I didn't do right in the beginning of that journey because oftentimes I would jump in they've got to do this housing application or job. Well, I would just do the application for them. Here, let me help lighten the burden, when the reality is that doesn't help because then they are not self-sustaining. They don't get the benefit of, I did this. This is my accomplishment. I'm robbing people of their bottoms. And I learned that through the journey by being a person in recovery, but then also trying to help others in recovery, how I was doing it all wrong in many ways too. So I love that you talk about.
I mean, there's so much shame and stigma associated with this too. And so much of the world telling people that they're bad and they can't do things. So they really need, I think, when someone's attempting to go into recovery, they need to do as much as they can possibly do themselves so that they can own it.
Exactly.
Own the good stuff, because you're pummeled with bad messaging and shame.
I love that. And that's one of the things is that, I used to encourage people to, even if they're feeling horrible, if 12-step is your path, go to a meeting anyway. Or if you have a counselor, go to your counselor, go to your faith-based organization, whatever it is that is part of the solution, to do that, even if you're feeling awful, because the reality is, even if you leave not feeling a lot better, nothing can argue with the fact that you tangibly took a step in the right direction. So I love that you had said earlier too, your response to your daughter is okay, that happened. So what now? As opposed to focusing and dissecting on the problem. And what I love being forward focused on, well, what's the next step? What's the next right thing?
Here's the other thing too. I mean, probably all of my closest friends, or most of my closest friends, have lost a child. So there's a certain element of just really, really horrible luck. You know what I mean? And that makes me sick to say it, but it is, because I look how many times she overdosed And then you have somebody who maybe just tried something once and overdoses. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm not patting myself on the back. It's a big part of this. It was all her, and what wasn't her was luck. Honestly,
Right.
that's all I can attribute it to. And so, I mean, I think what I learned too is the value of holding space for somebody. So I wanted to be in her life for as long as I had her in this world. And that became my driving force, right? Not to do things for her. I still was going to behave in the way that I thought was best, but in order to support her and have this lovely person with me as much as possible while she was here.
I just love that. I want to ask you too, Maureen, as I, look at us getting a little bit closer to the end. I know you were going to be reading a little bit out of, I believe it was your book. And I don't know if you would be comfortable doing that now. I would love to hear that before phrasing my next question.
Oh, sure. I always like to read the prologue because it really gets inside of my head at the sickest that I was, because I would say I was probably as sick or sicker than she was.
Yeah.
It's winter 2017. I'm not sure how I get into the car, but I know I'm on my way to kill Bob. I don't want to take my eyes off the road because I'm feeling unsteady and it's important I get there. I don't want to miss him. A few minutes can make all the difference. I can see in my mind's eye the bat cracking across his skull. I won't stop there. I will beat him, a man twice my size, in front of whoever is there, despite his cries for mercy, over and over, until he stops moving, stops crying out, stops destroying my beautiful Katie. I won't quit until he isn't breathing. Then I will spit on him, something I've never even considered doing to anyone in my 54 years of life. I will do all of this, and I will never have a moment's guilt over it. I reach over and touch the top of the bat. This is long overdue. The calm exterior that the world sees has shattered. So many unanswered questions, so many late night pleas to God. I feel as though the bat is begging to kill Bob. I can't save my daughter, Katie, and sometimes that feels like the only certainty in my life. I can't make her stop using drugs any more than I could keep her from leaving any of the over 40 treatment centers she has left, or safeguard her from the double-digit number of overdoses. I finally come to the realization that there is nothing I can do or say that will make a difference. I'm drifting to one side of the road when my phone rings and snaps me back to attention. I hope for a brief second that it will be the call, the one that I've dreamed about, that will tell me this is all a mistake, nothing to worry about. Go home and eat your ice cream. And when I realize that isn't happening, I wonder briefly if people on the way to kill someone answer the phone.
Maureen, you are just, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I'm looking at the clock with a minute to go. And it's just like that, hearing that is so powerful. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and ask you if you have just any last one quick kind of message or word or phrase that you would like people to associate with you.
I would say to never give up, keep hope. Katie has almost 5 years of recovery. She got everything and more than she ever dreamed she could have. She's going to make me a grandmother in a couple of months and has a great job and an apartment and a new car and all the things she never thought she'd get. And everyone in that book that I talk about is in recovery. So don't give up hope.
Thank you so much, Maureen. You are hope. I am so grateful that you did this show with me. I'm so grateful to you. I'm grateful that we got connected and for the amazing work that you do. And I can't wait for the viewers to have a chance to see your story. I want to thank everybody for watching this episode of Recovery Rockstar. And again, remind you, Recovery Day at the State House on February 16th. And also to, if anything that you can remember from hearing this show, is that there is hope. So if somebody is struggling, please don't hesitate to reach out. We thank you all for viewing, and we'll see you next time on Recovery Rockstar.
Thanks.